Hey, I'm Vince. Today I'm going to share with you a book that I think you should know about that was an absolute bombshell, not just to science, but to all of academia when it came out. And this is The History of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. The book is the most quoted book of the 20th century. It was originally supposed to be a history book, but it had a far-reaching application for a number of fields, most notably philosophy. And people either loved it or hated it. Kuhn himself just set out to write a book to show the history of science. In an interview, he once said, "I feel like there are two Thomases, the one everyone keeps attacking and the one who just wrote a book on the history of science." This book was really difficult to make into a 5-minute video. So I have a longer video on my channel where I go a lot more in depth with things that we'll talk about in this video. So if you like this one, I recommend that one. Okay, what does the book say and why was it so controversial? What Kuhn said was that when you look at the history of science, what you find is that it goes through different phases. The first he called normal science. He says that during this period of normal science, there is a prevailing view that governs what the scientists do, how they do it, and what they're looking for. That is, they look at the world through a certain lens, or what he calls a paradigm. For instance, before Copernicus, the prevailing view was that the Earth was at the center of the universe. And so all research was done with that understanding. The primary focus of science in this stage, Kuhn says, is puzzle solving. Scientists try to answer questions that come up within that paradigm or within that framework. But then there does emerge a crisis. Anomalies start popping up and the existing paradigm just can't explain it. So, for instance, scientists tried very hard to keep the Earth-centered universe, but more and more puzzling movements in the sky just couldn't be explained. Step 3 is revolutionary science. This is where new ideas start to emerge and they're incompatible with the existing paradigm. So for instance, the Copernican revolution, where he places the sun at the center of the universe. And the last phase is the paradigm shift. This is where the new way of looking at the world is accepted and the old paradigm is gone, and then a new period of normal science starts. Okay, so why is that so controversial? Well, there's a number of reasons, but they really center around this notion that science is not as pristine as we might like to think. And what I mean by that is that scientists like to think of themselves, and in the modern era, common people like to agree, they think of themselves as being objective and getting rid of human influence, and it's an unadulterated search for truth. The point is that we normally think of scientists as going into a laboratory with no preconceptions and they just do science. They just start doing experiments and they go wherever the science leads them. They find the truth. They only deal in facts. What Kuhn is saying is during a period of normal science, they do operate under preconceived notions, and this governs what they are looking for. Not only that, but when anomalies pop up, a lot of times they're just swept under the rug. And so it is the scientific community as a whole that gets to decide what is worth pursuing and what's not. And this really upset the purists because they want to say, no, 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 we go wherever the science takes us. And that's just not the case. However, this is where we're going to start seeing more and more human influence. If you do start to question that pervasive paradigm, you're ousted. People think you are a quack and you can't get a job at a good university. Funding is also an issue during this period of normal science. People who fund scientific experiments don't give money to people who operate outside of the norm. So it's hard to do any research that doesn't align with the prevailing view. But also, people who fund scientific research don't just do it out of the goodness of their heart. They generally want some sort of return for their investment. And so funders guide the pathway of science. So this is another way that human influence is prevalent in science. During the crisis, someone comes along and comes up with a new paradigm. But here's where it gets really interesting. What you think is going to happen is everyone's going to say, "Oh, that's so terrific. Thank you, Copernicus. Thank you, Einstein. You've saved science." But that's just not what happens, because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with professors and scientists who have made their career in the old paradigm. They've maybe published a bunch of books and their whole reputation is on the line. So even though there is a successful resolution to the crisis, what happens historically is that that new way is rejected, except by the young students who like new ideas. So many times the younger people don't accept the new paradigm because it's right. They accept it because it's new and it's cool. And then what happens? Well, the old guard dies out and the new kids become the new professors, and so the new paradigm takes over, and then we have a new normal science. And here's a really cool part about these two competing paradigms. The new guard and the old guard can't really argue about who's right or wrong, because the new paradigm often takes over the language so that the words are used in new ways. For instance, a Newtonian physicist and an Einsteinian physicist have a hard time debating because they mean something fundamentally different when they say the word mass. Kuhn calls this incommensurability, stating that there's not an objective reality that can be used to assess the reliability of the new paradigm or the old paradigm. And this is another point that got Kuhn in trouble with the scientists, because they like to think, and like I said, we do too, that there exists an objective reality in which we can measure all things. But Kuhn is saying even measuring scientific ideas is a subjective thing, and there is an awful lot of human influence in it. Okay, that is my short summary of Thomas Kuhn's A History of Scientific Revolutions. I have a longer video on my channel, like I said, in case you're interested. I wanted to mention one other thing briefly before ending this short video, but I watched a video yesterday that I thought really put this in perspective from one of my favorite science YouTubers, and I'll put the link in the description. She was not talking about and didn't reference Kuhn's work. She was giving her story of why she is no longer in the field of physics. And she said two things that I thought were interesting and really bolstered this idea of how science is not, this pure thing that just searches for knowledge and truth. First, she says institutions are money-making machines. They get grad students who will get grants, and the university gets a portion of that grant money. So they direct their grad students to do research that is mainstream. And she said they need to do research that's edgy, but it's not too edgy. So that made me kind of think about this normal science thing. So the goal is not to discover things per se, but the goal of the university is to discover profitable things. The second thing she said that I thought was interesting was that she was point blank told that the reason that she wasn't getting an internship was because she was a woman. Now, this was a number of years ago and probably wouldn't happen today, but in fact, the exact opposite might happen today. Universities probably get more grants and more prestige for hiring women and minorities. But even in that, we can see that one way or the other, the hiring practices, the publishing practices, and the funding practices are not based solely on this unadulterated quest for truth. Okay, so there's my video. If you liked it, like it, and have a good day.